So today I want to talk about something that's a bit heavy. I'm going to be talking about the death penalty. So, trigger warning. If discussions of physical violence against other human beings affects you, this might not be the video for you. With that said, the Justice Department has created new policy changes, new rules and regulations that have expanded some of the federal government's positions on capital punishment. So, before I get into the details of that and what that will ultimately mean and all of its implications, I would like to make abundantly clear my position on the death penalty. I'm an anarchist. I do not believe in the use of state power. I believe that the death penalty is the most absolute and abhorrent use of state power that exists, whether that is in the form of a police officer killing a person in the street, or the spectacle and theatrics of a state-sanctioned execution. I find both just as invalid and wrong. I believe that in seeking justice, when a crime has been committed, that the goal is to find a way to make amends for those who have been harmed and to rehabilitate those that did the harm. I do not believe that the goal is revenge or retribution, or that we should be seeking an ultimately final punishment for crimes that have been committed. I believe that that opens us up to too many possibilities of making a very, very permanent mistake. There are people who have been on death row who have been found innocent. There's also been plenty of mistakes performed during the execution to cause immense amounts of suffering. I do not stand for any of that. And since I believe I've made myself abundantly clear that I do not support the death penalty, I would like to take a look at what these new rules really entail. So the rule basically can be broken down as doing two major things. The first thing that it does is that it tries to expand the methods that can be used for federal executions. So first and foremost, it grants the federal government, if a state allows for it in which the execution is taking place, to utilize methods such as electrocution, firing squad, and the use of inert gas like nitrogen. And while this sounds scary, it really doesn't actually do much because all the power goes to the states. And the second thing that it does is it affirms the state's ability to control its methods of execution. And again, this doesn't really sound that much of a problem, right? They both sound pretty innocuous. And furthermore, there's every likelihood that the Biden administration will just remove this rule really close into the next term. So what's the point of this rule? What is the point of me even talking about this? Well, I'd like to get into that. But first, I want to look at these particular statistics, namely that lethal injection is still legal in 28 states. I know it says 32 there, but 4 of the states no longer have an active death penalty up to a certain date. So at the current moment in the United States, 28 states still have the death penalty. That is a majority. And of that majority of states, the good majority of these states listed are Republican states or swing states. I think that that's an important component of what's going on here. But going down the list, you still have 9 states who have electrocution as a valid form of execution, besides lethal injection. 7 states allow for lethal gas. 3 states still allow for hanging. And 3 states still allow for firing squads. And while this is not the preferred method, lethal injection is still the preferred method, these options are available in many states. The only form that's left off of here is the use of inert gas, which is usually nitrogen, and it hasn't really been tested or used, so it's not really being put on the table in this particular way, though Oklahoma has approved it, and possibly a few other states. Why is any of this important? Well, exploring these different methods, there's another understanding that has to be taken into account. Namely, is there any sort of humane understanding within the context of accepting that executions exist? Which one of these is humane? The fact is, none of them are. And while lethal injection has kind of had this myth about it that it is humane, it's been proven that it's really not. Lethal injection comes in 2 forms that can be best summed up as a 3-drug solution and a 1-drug solution. The 3-drug solution would be humane on some level if it was applied by a physician. But no physician is actually going to apply this because it's a violation of the Hippocratic Oath, the oath that doctors take to do no harm. So these injections are being done by people who have no idea what they're doing. What that really means is that the first drug of that 3-drug solution, which is a sedative, is often applied incorrectly. And assuming that any of the drugs can properly find their way into the spots that they're supposed to and don't cause physical harm of multiple attempts to inject. If the sedative doesn't go off, the other 2 drugs cause immense physical pain and suffering. The 1-drug solution also causes immense amounts of pain, and it's what's used by the federal government in the federal executions that the Trump administration has been calling for. That particular drug causes a burning sensation through the veins that is immense. So no, lethal injection is not a humane way to kill someone. And as the other methods have been kind of pushed to the side, we know that none of them are humane. Electrocution causes massive burns across the body. Lethal gas causes asphyxiation and choking, which is extremely painful. Firing squad, while probably the one that can probably be the least botched, leaves you with a full minute of suffering and pain from what tests have shown. And hanging is a long, arduous ordeal that lasts for hours. So the only solution left is the nitrogen solution that hasn't really been tested. And we don't really have full details, but the theory behind it is it just kind of makes you go to sleep as your oxygen supply disappears. It's not really toxic, it's just this inert gas that makes you go to sleep. And I guess we could argue that's potentially humane, but again, it hasn't been tested. So given these methods and given this understanding that states have about the different forms of execution that exist, what does this new rule and regulation really hope to accomplish? Well, the first thing that I think it hopes to accomplish is that there are currently 5 people subject to execution by the federal government through federal executions before Biden takes office. And the only thing that is separating these people from being killed and potentially having a life sentence or some form of alternative punishment is 2 months' time. I believe that these procedures are being done to attempt to subvert any attempts at a stay of execution that the defense attorneys might call for over the coming months to try to postpone until Biden takes office. Essentially, the Trump administration is going for its last bit of blood. And given that, and given the desire for expediency that is mentioned within the rules and policy changes themselves, I believe that by advocating for very specific policies and for very specific rulings of the state, that they are hoping to make it more difficult for any stay of execution to be permitted, especially ones that might revolve around the concept of the Eighth Amendment, specifically that of cruel and unusual punishment being applied. If it all of a sudden is up to the states to determine it, and that's been fully acknowledged by the federal government, it might make it more difficult in those 5 cases. The second issue that I think is the reason for all of this is that the federal government and some of the states are finding it more difficult over time due to a general world belief that public executions are wrong, to get their hands on some of these drugs to administer lethal injection. There's been actual boycotts and removals of access to these drugs from the US government and from state governments. So given that, I believe that the US government is preparing alternative methods, old methods, and possibly this new method of inert gas to attempt to find solutions to preempt the impossibility of attaining the drugs. Essentially, they are prepping in advance to make expedient executions, as the Trump administration has shown that it wants to do in the past with federal executions. And I believe that these two represent the overwhelming positions that the Trump administration has shown over the past 4 years towards federal executions and would have continued to show in the 4 years to follow had they been reelected. The next one is a little bit speculative, but I think there's some foundation for it. Namely, that I think this is a call to action for the states to start implementing these different options to help expedite the process of executions. Basically, South Carolina, for example, has added a law recently through their Senate and is currently in the House of Representatives in South Carolina to add firing squads and electrocutions back on the books and into their law. I believe that a lot of states over the next 4 years might attempt to do something similar in order to create the illusion of choice for a lot of their prisoners that are on death row. If either the state or the prisoner can choose from several options, it is harder to make a case that they are being subject to cruel and unusual punishment, because if the prisoner can choose or can appeal for a different option, there is less reason to get a stay of execution. And again, that would expedite executions. The last thing is that I think it's a potential precedent, not for the states, but for what the Republican Party might be calling for in 4 years' time if a more charismatic proto-fascist enters the office of the presidency. The rules are already in play. They don't have to be rewritten. They just have to be put right back in. And it'll be a continuation of what the Trump administration hoped to do, which is expand federal executions, something that was removed for almost, I think, 17 years from the federal government, at least officially, right? So I think that all of this is something that we need to be looking out for over the next 4 years and keeping an eye out and just kind of observing and watching for what might be coming. And I hope that some of those 5 people can find a way to get some sort of delay to make it through to the Biden administration where they may not be executed by the federal government. I hope that we can monitor and watch all of these different perspectives and that this doesn't turn into something greater. With that said, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and I hope you subscribe, and I hope you hit the bell for notifications. I'm not going to pressure you on such a heavy video. If you like this, if you like my content, feel free to check out my Twitter and my Discord. They're in the description below. With that said, my name is Anarchist Tara, and I hope that I'm wrong. And I hope that I've been able to inform you on all of this. And I hope you're able to have a good day after watching this.